So what we thought today would be useful to do would be to unpack how we can further support educators to be culturally competent, to respect multiple ways of knowing, of seeing, of living, to celebrate the benefits of diversity, and to have an ability to understand and honour differences, and to promote cultural competence in children. So in this session we'll have opportunities to ask questions, to share experiences, and we'll also look to showcase some of the great work that's actually happening in the services. So this discussion is really topical. As Karen said, NAIDOC Week is coming up in 2 days, but it is important to remind ourselves that embedding Indigenous cultures into our practices and program is really important, but we shouldn't forget that cultural competence is broader than that. It's our will and actions to build understanding between people, to be respectful and to be open to cultural perspectives, strengthen cultural security and work towards equity and opportunity. So as I said, you're all probably very familiar with the organisations that our esteemed panel members represent. If you have any questions about the role of these organisations, please don't hesitate to ask. If you need to seek clarification of the roles or the priorities. So before we open the session to questions, you'll note on your tables that there's a sheet that we've put together. We've tried to identify some of the rich resources that are out in the sector around this issue of cultural competence, but we're also very cognizant of the fact that there's probably a lot that we haven't identified yet, and so we would ask if you could, if you had any suggestions to add to that list, we'd be very pleased to have those suggestions. So, we'll open the panel up for some questions, but I might start the ball rolling by asking, Geraldine, may I ask my first question of you? And it relates to the fact that we've talked about NAIDOC Week coming up, and Snake's Children's Week is on the 4th of August. And so while these are really important opportunities to celebrate and raise awareness of Indigenous cultures, I'd also like to ask, your ideas and suggestions around how we embed cultural awareness in philosophies, in programs, in policies, rather so that we're fostering that embedded approach rather than a tokenistic approach.
I think this is on. Can you hear me? Okay, so it's how we can embed. I think, first of all, I would like to say that I really am pleased that we do have a curriculum document in the early years, like the Early Years Learning Framework. I think that it's led the way for an inclusiveness within early childhood services, particularly in relation to providing cultural context, particularly in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, about how they can be taught, how you incorporate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures within services. And it's been really great. And I come from a background really with education in Victoria. I also sit on an organisation called the Victorian Aboriginal Education Association Incorporated. And what we're trying to do within this state and throughout the nation is to incorporate Aboriginal cultural competence into standards for teachers. So we want to look at and in those standards, within the ACECQA standards, there's 1.4 and 2.4. And one is looking at teachers that are able to teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and have an understanding of them and about their backgrounds and where they come from. And it's about knowing about their culture. And I think that what needs to happen, and what happened, and I really feel pleased that I'm part of the early childhood sector, because it's the beginning and it's where it's starting to happen, so it is happening there. And we want to improve that, that into other schools. And it needs to be, and I think that what needs to happen is it does need to be embedded in services. It needs to be about people understanding, about educators understanding about culture themselves, about themselves and where they come from, and how that they relate those sorts of things of understanding about other cultures into understanding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And it's also it's really imperative that you do have a good understanding, and it's about so that you're able to teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to be comfortable within your services so that they're willing to learn and they're willing to engage. It's also about you, the early childhood educators, teaching non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students about Aboriginal culture. And I think that's really important. And I know, and I guess I don't know whether all of you know, but and whether it's me just being an Indigenous person, but having an understanding of what happens throughout the whole nation, the world, I guess, about Indigenous people, and knowing that all of the colonisations that occurred, all of those impacts that have happened in relation to how we are as a people, how that's impacted on our psyche and how we feel about ourselves. And I think that, you know, for too long, that's what we've done. Our children have always felt that they were second or third rate citizens in this country. And I believe that it's something that's intergenerational. And what you're able to do with the help of the Early Years Learning Framework and within your services, and not just do it on National Aboriginal and Islander Children's Day, no, NAIDOC, the NAIDOC week ceremonies, or Aboriginal Children's Day with Snake, but you can do that throughout, and educators can do that throughout the whole program. It can permeate your entire program, and that's what needs to happen. I think that's where you have the ability to embed cultural competence by being educators and by teaching not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to feel good and proud about who they are, but other children to respect and value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And you can do that in various ways. There's a whole, as I said, the framework has the ability for you to do that. I mentioned in a talk that I gave in Canberra about a month ago about how our services use one of the principles, and it's about connecting to your world. And it's about, you know, it's about where you, as a non-Indigenous person, can show your background about where you came from and how you came to Australia. And you can, in the map of the world, you can show that. Then you can show, within connecting to that child's world, about where that child comes from, and that Australian, and particularly that Aboriginal child. You have the ability to say, you know, your country is to a particular region, you belong to a particular Aboriginal nation. So you can, there are ways that can be done, and that's connecting not only that Aboriginal child to culture, but it's alerting those other children about that cultural background and where that person comes from. But there's a whole host of things that you can do. You know about the posters, you know about the resources, you know about all of those things that you can incorporate within your service. But really, I think the most important thing is about understanding about culture and about understanding where you stand within that area of culture. It's about looking at yourself and interrogating yourself in relation to culture, and about respecting and embedding Aboriginal perspectives into your programming.
Thanks, Geraldine. And those links are really strong with the learning frameworks, aren't they? And particularly that quality area, that learning outcome 3. Any questions from the floor for any of our panel members? No? I just wanted to ask Jennifer, in her role with the Inclusion Support Agency, I imagine that you're seeing lots of really positive practices in your work with educators and services. And I just wondered if you wanted to provide an example of some of the rich work, some examples of maybe what you've seen in terms of educators building confidence in skills that have resulted in a change in practice.
Wouldn't that be nice if I could do that? Of course, we have lots and lots of examples where practice is changed. Cultural competency, when I was talking to Rhonda about it originally, I said, yes, it is complex, But in thinking about it and going to Mr. Google and getting all the definitions, which all come down to very much a similar thing, what I've actually come to is communication is actually the key. That if we take the trouble to know our families and their community and not pigeonhole them, I think that that's one of the major things. And cultural awareness, I know, is really important, but taking that the next step and saying, well, actually it's Ramadan at the moment, it's NAIDOC week next week, so we do this, we do that. It actually is that embedding into the practice, and that is helping right across the country with inclusion support. I know the first thing that inclusion support facilitators say when they go into an environment that they've been invited into by an educator is, have you spoken to the family? And you would be amazed at how many say, no, I didn't like to, or no, I didn't see them, or no, I think I know where the child's at. The basic thing, the first thing that goes into the service support plan is communicate with the family. And one of the sayings that I've written it down so I don't forget it, that we found this week in our research on cultural competency, is the family have to know you care before they will care about what you say. So it's finding those connections with each and every family and knowing, and I mean, just bringing it back to us, you know, we're Australian, God, how good's that? And of course we all love football, don't we? Could not care less. But that's something that I have to let people know when they start talking to me about football. I go, yep, beaut, don't care. But I'm still Australian, I'm still from Melbourne, you know, all of those things. So it's getting to know, and that's sort of what the inclusion support facilitators are doing when they go out and talking to educators, is saying to them, get to know the family. Don't judge them just because they're Muslim or they're Aboriginal or they're Chinese. It's actually get to know them and see where the connection is from your beliefs and your values, so that you can find connections and maybe say, okay, you don't like football, I still like you as a person. That never happens.
That's a very important point about not stereotyping, isn't it? Now, I'll just check with our panel, our participants. Are there any questions emerging for the panel? Narelle's very new to her role. She's, is it 4 weeks, Narelle? And she brings with her to that role a body of experience, and we'd like to draw on that today. We're really keen to hear some of the examples about how you've been working with educators to build that understanding of and the respect for other cultures. And I guess Geraldine and Jen have both kind of alluded to some of those examples, but I know that you've got some rich examples too from your work.
Look, I think just reflecting on what both Jennifer and Geraldine have spoken about is that cultural competency is embedded in the practice of relationships, and everything around that, it doesn't need to be laced as actually something separate. It's actually what we do in our everyday business with children and families, and it's getting to know them and embedding those beliefs and building trust. I actually work for the Indigenous Professional Support Unit, which is part of the Inclusion Professional Support Program. And there have been some very exciting projects happening within the IPSU around working with mainstream services who are looking at asking questions about how do we actually build connections to community, how do we work better with our families. And one example of that is a community practice project, which was also known as the Sister Service, where we actually paired an Indigenous early childhood service with a mainstream service, and they were doing some work together where they started conversations, because there's often this expectation that you can pick up a resource or a booklet or gather a few bits and pieces and pop them into your program and you're all of a sudden culturally competent. we know that that's not the case. It's actually the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other deeper layers, and the Western Australian IPSU unit actually use an iceberg concept, which I can pass on as a resource, which gets us thinking about the things that are actually under the sea, which are the deeper, more meaningful things about what really constitutes culture. But the Sister Service project worked very well, but has actually since finished. And what's grown from that is a project in conjunction with the PSC, where we're now running yarn circles with in mainstream across mainstream services, because the IPSU works predominantly with budget-based funded services, so including MACs, playgroups, mobile preschools, and outside school hours care. And what's been happening is we've been coming together in a space and using quite often an Indigenous service where we've actually got staff talking about getting to know your community. What works on a website is not going to work in your particular service, in your particular neighbourhood and community. It's about getting to know who are your local, your lands council, who are the members of your community working parties in those more remote places and locations, and building relationships. And I think the exciting thing around that has been people are often awkward about asking questions and they don't want to say the wrong thing, or so sometimes that means they don't ask, and you've just nailed it by saying, you know, did you speak? What have you said to families? So looking at the strengths of the community that you're working with, and that it is contextualised to that community, because one size does not fit all. And I come from far western New South Wales, and just, you know, 100 kilometres down the road is very different. So the things that would be happening in Wilcannia are far different to what's happening in Menindee and Ivanhoe and the further west you head. I think that's probably a great example of one of the IPSU projects.
It is a great example. The Sister Service project sounds really exciting. And I've actually been involved in one of the yarning circles, and the rich discussion that happens at those yarning circles, and the opportunity to reflect on practice, but also to go away and think about what that means for your service and come back with some rich practical examples about how you can change practice. It's been really inspirational, really.
Sorry, I just also remembered thinking about the Educator's Guide, that again, going back to Geraldine's thinking about knowledge, learning about your community, and then reflecting on your own skills and attitudes. So that, as you said, we've actually been given this platform to really build and embed quality, respectful practice that is really valuing the first owners of our land.
When you were talking then to Narelle and Geraldine and Jen, the issue about training and the role our registered training organisations and our universities play in terms of training people to feel comfortable and confident about how they approach this area. Because I know with a lot of my conversations with educators, it's often a fear that they might say the wrong thing. So instead of being fearful of saying the wrong thing, they're not actually saying very much at all. So that kind of leads me on to a question that I have for you, Dawson, around professional development. And we've had some conversations today about the professional development opportunities that are available across the sector. And I'm really interested to talk with you about that issue about professional development that actually changes practice, and also how can we collaboratively across all of the organisations that are represented here today, how can we help services make informed decisions about how they spend their professional development funding and dollars?
Thanks, Rhonda. Hi, everybody. I'll focus a little bit on that, the term collaborative too, and the things that I wanted to talk about. But in terms of how we actually help services come to an informed decision, one of the things that we're focusing on right now in this PSCs around the country, as well as the PSC Alliance, is assisting them with their workplace planning processes. As you would, I'm sure you would all know that the PSC is changing its focus to providing, we've been providing subsidized training to long daycare. That'll be changing to non-subsidized training. One of the things that, and then our focus will be more on the OSH and family daycare. So our entire focus will be going well, not entire, but our entire focus with the department will be going to OSH and family daycare. And we'll be continuing to provide services to long daycare. But one of the things that we're doing right now is we're looking and developing their workplace planning processes and providing tools for that. I think that's one of the good outcomes of the new Long Day Care Professional Development Fund, is that we're gearing up every PSC and the Alliance. If you go on the PSC Alliance website, you'll see a tool there for workplace planning. Now that's you do that yourself. In most of, and I'm sure all of the PSCs, I know the organization that I run, Child Australia, we have a whole consultation process. So it will involve assisting them identify what their needs are based on, what kind of practice they've got, what are their governance structures, what sort of professional development that they require. So they've done this before, but I think with the new fund and our focus on identifying and helping services understand, well, how do I best use this funding that we're going to get? It's a massive amount of money that's coming into the sector. So how they use that funds is really important. So we're spending a lot of time just focusing on their needs right now. So I think that'll be good for the entire long daycare sector itself. One thing I'd like to say about professional development and training is that when it comes to competency in cultural competency, you're not going to get there with a 2-hour training program, are you? That's something that I think the PSCs and the IPSP program as a whole learned a long time ago, is that if you're trying to embed learning and changing practice and changing ideas, it doesn't happen with just short, sharp little training packages. They really have to be accompanied by a fairly involved consultation process with a lot of reflective practice and ongoing work with those centers. And that's what we're doing around cultural competence as well. We're spending a lot of time going in. In fact, in my organization, we combine reflective practice training with cultural competence. We just put the two together because I think that's the other key element, is reflective practice, understanding what are my biases, understanding kind of where I'm coming from in the first place, and then being able to develop some of the things that Geraldine and others have mentioned here today, which is really embedding that into your thinking, into the relationships that you have. But until you really reflect on where am I coming from, if I'm white and Anglo-Saxon, then I've got a lot to learn. So we spend a lot of time on reflective practice. The other area is collaboration. I think that was mentioned here as well, the importance of it. PSC is, we've got protocols with all the other IPSP components, ISA and IPSUs. And we work really hard to work together with and collaborate with on cultural competence and a range of training. It's important that we work together. We're we're 3 streams, but we're all attempting to achieve the same thing. I guess I'm going to use my own organization's example, but Cultural Connections is a product that we developed, and it's got a handbook and it's got a kit. And if you looked at the kit, which is essentially a bag it's kind of a goodie bag. It'll have puppets and dolls and books and a range of tools. And if you just looked at that on its own, it would look pretty superficial, almost trite. You'd think, this is just not enough. The handbook then accompanied by training, accompanied by consultation, accompanied by ongoing contact helps to embed that thinking. So it's a process. It's not just an event. I think I might stop there and see if there's any questions.
Much like the way we work with children in terms of the importance of the process. Your point too about working collaboratively, and I think that's a really important and key issue. And I have drawn on the expertise in this panel, but also in our group today in terms of looking at how we can further support the work that's happening around building cultural competence, but also looking at how we can support our authorised officers as well to understand and unpack that for themselves, but also to be able to understand what's important when they're assessing and rating early childhood education and care services. Any questions? Our panel have been so comprehensive in their responses that we've left no question unanswered in the room. But this isn't the only opportunity to ask questions. We are really keen to, as I said, work collaboratively to unpack this a little further and support educators in their important work with children and families. And I think we've heard some really interesting discussions, some thought-provoking ideas, some suggestions, some examples of good practice. I've certainly taken some notes, and I'm looking forward to using some of your suggestions and your examples of good practice in different forums. So I'd just like to ask you to join with me in thanking the members of the panel, Geraldine, Jen, Narelle and Dawson, for this open, insightful discussion, and I think generating some relevant and practical options to further explore. So thank you very much.